Russia and Ukraine agree on a possible temporary ceasefire to evacuate civilians and provide humanitarian support as the war enters its second week. Another record number of COVID-19 infections. South Korea adds over 240,000 new daily infections as of Thursday evening as the Omicron variant continues to rip through the population. Early voting for South Korea's presidential race begins on Friday. The front-running candidates will cast their votes during the two-day period before the March 9th race.
Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
And I'm Oh Soo-young. It's 8 a.m. in Seoul, Korea on March 4th. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
We begin, though, with the crisis in Ukraine after Russia's invasion of that country just over a week ago now. A second round of talks between the two sides has ended. Both parties agreed to establish safe zones for civilians to safely evacuate through.
Russia's delegation called the outcome substantial progress, but Moscow continues its assault on Ukraine. Our Ji-young starts us off.
Ukraine and Russia ended a second round of ceasefire talks on the 8th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Kyiv says the talks did not yield the results that it hoped for, but the two sides have agreed on a tentative plan to create a humanitarian corridor for evacuating civilians. Russia's negotiator described it as substantial progress.
So the sides, representatives of the Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation and Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, have agreed on the format for humanitarian corridors for civilians to leave and possibly stopping military action in the area as civilians leave. I think it is substantial progress.
Despite peace talks, Moscow's forces carried on with assaults on Ukrainian cities, including Mariupol, which is the main port city in the east. Russian military had also entered the southern city of Enerhodar, the site of the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, which is responsible for about 1/4 of the country's power generation. Russian forces said they had seized Kherson on Thursday, the first major Ukrainian city to fall, and have taken over local government headquarters in the Black Sea port city of roughly 280,000 people. Also, Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, was continuously bombarded. Around 1 million people have fled Ukraine, according to the United Nations, since the start of the Russian attack. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he's willing to have an open conversation with Russia's President Vladimir Putin.
It's not about I want to talk with Putin. I think I have to talk with Putin. The world has to talk with Putin because there are no other ways to stop this war. That's why I have to.
As the war advances, the U.S. created a new hotline with Russia's Ministry of Defense on Thursday in order to prevent miscalculation, military incidents, and escalation. Ji-young, Arirang News.
The United States has announced new sanctions on more than a dozen Russian oligarchs and their families, on top of the sweeping punitive measures it imposed on Moscow earlier this week, following its invasion of Ukraine. Our Kim Yo-sun reports.
The Biden administration has imposed sweeping sanctions on 19 wealthy Russian individuals and 47 of their family members, as well as their close associates, as part of additional U.S. penalties on Moscow for invading Ukraine.
What we're talking about here is seizing their assets, seizing their yachts, and making it harder for them to send their children to colleges and universities in the West. These are significant steps that will impact the people who are closely around President Putin.
They include the Kremlin spokesperson and Alisher Usmanov, one of the wealthiest men in Russia. Britain has also newly sanctioned 2 billionaire allies of Putin, including the former Deputy Prime Minister of Russia. They'll be subject to full asset freezes and travel bans. These individuals have already been sanctioned by the EU. Brussels is also seeking to remove Russia's most favored nation status at the World Trade Organization. The move is expected to sharply hike tariffs on Russia's exports to the EU. It also said it's ready to take additional steps against Moscow if needed.
And we will take additional steps if the situation deteriorates on the ground. At the same time, we are preparing in case of retaliation. In particular, we are working to diversify our energy supplies. We discussed it.
Meanwhile, the UN nuclear watchdog says its board of directors has backed a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The resolution calling for Moscow to let Ukraine control all its nuclear facilities was passed on Thursday at an emergency meeting of the IAEA. 26 of the 35-nation board supported the resolution. Russia and China voted against it. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in spoke over the phone on Thursday with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, with the South Korean leader reaffirming Seoul's solidarity with Ukraine. Officials say President Moon delivered his respect for people in Ukraine fighting Russia and expressed his hope for peace. The Ukrainian president thanked President Moon for his support and asked Seoul to help them overcome the crisis. Seoul has joined sanctions against Moscow and plans to provide humanitarian aid worth $10 million to that country. President Moon also asked Zelensky to secure the safety of dozens of South Korean nationals still in Ukraine. And the city of Seoul has joined the global Peace Light campaign, which involves having major landmarks lit up in yellow and blue in support of Ukraine. From this week, 7 landmarks, including City Hall, the island of Sebitsom in the Han River, Solo Media Canvas and Seoul Tower will shine yellow and blue, the colours of the Ukrainian flag. Of course, the lights stay on for 4 to 5 hours every evening. The city government plans to work with more public and private venues to expand the campaign through March, but officials say it will continue until there's peace in Ukraine. And now we turn to the COVID-19 situation in South Korea, which is going from bad to worse, it seems. The country is expecting to see around 250,000 new cases on this Friday.
And for more, our reporter Kim Bo-kyung is in the studio. Good morning, Bo-kyung.
Good morning.
Well, let's start with the daily tally, Bo-kyung. How many are we expecting to see on Friday?
Well, we're expecting to see an all-time high number because as of 9 p.m. Thursday, South Korea reported 244,889 new infections. That is around 58,000 more than the same time previous day, which was around 186,000. Just considering the number of cases reported up to 9 p.m., the country had already recorded a record high. South Korea saw the daily tally go over the 200,000 mark for the first time on Wednesday, and after a slight dip on Thursday, it went right back up with a soaring increase in confirmed cases. This all-time high figure is twice more than the number from 2 weeks ago. Among the new cases reported so far, Seoul Metropolitan City saw at least 59,277 new cases, the first time the city surpassed the 50,000 mark. And Gyeonggi-do province, too, is expected to see a fresh high, as it already reported around 76,000. Health authorities originally predicted that we would see more than 230,000 new COVID-19 cases by Election Day, which is on March 9th, yet the figure has been passed with the pace of the spread.
Now, despite this surge due to Omicron, the government is considering whether to further ease social distancing guidelines, which have been doing over recent weeks. What kind of options are looking most feasible to officials right now?
Well, a social gathering cap of a maximum 6 people and 10 p.m. shutdown orders were set to expire on March 13th. But as you said, the government has been mulling over easing the measures earlier than scheduled. According to the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure headquarters on Thursday, the country is expected to relax the measures and allow businesses to remain open until 11 p.m. while maintaining the social gathering cap of up to 6 people. The final decision is going to be announced at Friday's regular 11 a.m. briefing, and there is high possibility that changes will begin the next day, March 5th. The decision to make changes was made after consultation with business owners, medical experts, and local governments. And it is said the government took into account the damage small business owners had to grapple with.
And Pogyong, early voting for the next Korean president, it began just a few hours ago, didn't it? It began at 6 a.m. and it's going to continue until tomorrow, 6 p.m. So what kind of voting protocols are in place for those who are infected with COVID-19?
Well, Seon, the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters will allow those who have been infected or self-isolating to step out of their living quarters on March 5th for early voting, as well as on Election Day, March 9th. However, they must cast their ballots within a specific time frame. On the 5th, voters may temporarily leave their homes or quarantine sites at 5 p.m. and must arrive at polling stations before 6 p.m. And on the 9th, voters may also leave at 5 p.m. However, voting is only open for them between 6 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. on that day. They should walk, use their own cars, or use quarantine taxis to get to the stations. No other public transportation can be used. Text messages with guidelines will be sent from the government to those subject to special voting from Friday at noon until 4 p.m. on Wednesday.
Voters subject to special voting can vote at temporary polling stations after showing their identification card, the official government text message, or confirmation or isolation notice message.
Well, this surge really couldn't come at a worse time considering the election is coming up next week. But we hope that everyone can cast their ballots safely, including those who have COVID-19 and those who aren't infected with it. However, there must be some concerns considering there's a surge going on right now.
That's right. Before a PCR result comes out, voters who suspect they might have been infected are not considered a confirmed case. So they will be voting at the same time as other voters. As there is rapid surge in the number of cases in the country, test results are coming out later than usual, and there are concerns that this election could spark another surge.
The number of people getting PCR tests is going over 850,000. Up to now, we needed to wait around 12 hours to know results, but now it takes 18 hours. These people could be the cause of more infections.
Well, adding on to that, when it comes to the rapid antigen tests, even if people get positive results without a PCR test, they can vote normally. So this could be another reason for concern.
Well, it looks like we're going to have to keep our fingers crossed. Hope everything goes well. And well, it's lovely having you in the studio today, Pogyong. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
South Korea is temporarily allowing medical professionals to diagnose and treat patients from a distance using mobile technology.
Virtual healthcare has been booming here in South Korea as a result. Lee Shi-hu with this report.
When 28-year-old Kim Hee-kyung needs a medical consultation, she doesn't need to take time out of her day to visit a doctor. All she needs to do is to reach for her tablet and launch a mobile application. She puts in her personal info, selects her symptoms, and voila! Within minutes, she's face-to-face with the doctor in the comfort of her home.
안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하세요, 선생님.
어디가 불편하셔서
After the virtual consultation, the doctor makes a diagnosis and writes a prescription that is delivered to her home. With the spread of COVID-19, the South Korean government has temporarily allowed healthcare professionals to evaluate, diagnose, and treat patients from a distance using telecommunications technology. Since being legally permitted, the number of patients who have availed of the service has grown significantly.
Among the perks of telemedicine is that patients can see doctors and receive prescriptions quicker than they would during a traditional visit to a clinic. Through telemedicine, patients suffering from COVID-19 are receiving prescriptions quickly.
but its perks are not limited during the pandemic. Here at Inha University Hospital, telemedicine is offered to Koreans overseas and foreigners in South Korea who may not be able to access the care they need where they are. The doctor checks the condition of the patient located overseas as she would in an offline consultation during a conference call.
We began offering telemedicine to Koreans overseas as medical care can be less accessible and patients can experience cultural or language barriers during their care.
That's not to say there aren't limitations to this practice. There are initial costs associated with the technology, both for doctors and patients, and some are concerned that virtual medical examination may not be as effective.
I expect the advancement of medical technology and the development of digital healthcare will help alleviate current limitations.
Legal experts say changes must be made to the current law to allow telemedicine to be practiced permanently.
No countries outside of South Korea ban telemedicine entirely. South Korea needs to take a more open stance towards telemedicine and make the necessary reform to its medical law.
이시후, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Next week, South Korea will host the Medical Korea Conference 2022, both in person and virtually, from the COEX Convention Center in southern Seoul, not too far away from us here at Arirang TV. Into its 12th edition, it is Korea's largest global healthcare conference and brings together experts, speakers as well. They take deep looks at and share the latest trends in everything to do with healthcare and medicine. It is hosted by South Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare. It is organized by the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, and the channel you are watching now, Arirang TV, is the global media partner.
The in-person event lasts 2 days from the 10th to 11th of March, while the virtual event runs from the 10th of March to the 15th. And to get a sneak preview of this, we have in the studio today Dr. Kwon Sun-man, President of the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, joining us in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, firstly, could you tell us what the event covers and why Korea has been so eager to host an event like this every year? For the last decade or so?
Yeah, this event already becomes a globally recognized venue for exchange ideas and examining the recent trends in healthcare industry and the shared ideas for the visions for the future. For example, this year, this venue, this conference examines all key issues such as digital transformation, smart health, smart care systems. And this is a venue for gathering all important players in this field together, such as business experts and government officers and even general public investors. So this is a key avenue for all these sharing ideas and actual meeting for business interest and contracts.
Now this comes amid the pandemic. We hope it's the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. You're holding this healthcare conference in the middle of it. What kind of precautions are you putting in place, and how have the conferences been different from those you held pre-COVID-19?
You're right. Before this COVID-19 crisis, it was 100% face-to-face meetings. However, since this outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we changed the modality. It's the combination of various modalities of meetings, like purely face-to-face meetings and purely virtual meetings, and some meetings are kind of combinations of face-to-face and virtuals. And we work very closely with Arirang TV, and some of the keynote speeches are pre-recorded, and it is disseminated all over the world. So in a sense, it gave us an opportunity to more effectively using this opportunity to maximize the impact of this conference, relying various types of modalities of communications, in a sense.
And while the last 2 years of the pandemic certainly has been a time of turning crisis into opportunity, it's been a challenging time, but at the same time we saw quite a number of innovations, Professor. And well, how do you expect the global medical industry to develop after the crisis is over?
You're right. This crisis, this pandemic crisis is definitely a huge blow to the whole society, but at the same time, it gives us a good opportunity for innovations and some of those leading industries. More importantly, this pandemic crisis helped us to be fully aware of the importance of health system on our society. And that means that investment in healthcare system or health of the population is also an investment in economy, because as you know, when the pandemic is at the peak, many manufacturing plants are shut down, and it's a real suffering for self-employed and small business. So like Korea, if you have a good response to this COVID-19, it can be a good positive impact and smaller negative impact on the economy. And in terms of health industry, it was a good opportunity to achieve a record high increase in export in the biopharma healthcare industry, like medicines and diagnostics. So it will be a good impetus to continue this trend for the Korean healthcare industry. And other types of innovations include like telemedicines, because for a long time, Korea did not allow a virtual telemedicine consultations, but during this pandemic crisis, we temporarily allow a virtual consultations, phone-based consultations between consumers and doctors. And I hope that this kind of a innovation will continue and become a very important element for the digital transformation in healthcare in Korea.
Yeah, it's certainly the remote connection between doctor and patient is something other countries have already established over recent years. So it's good to see Korea catching up in that regard. The Moon Jae-in administration has been pressing very hard ever since the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure that South Korea can become a global leader in terms of medical equipment, vaccines, treatments and whatnot. Do you think the country is in a good position now to take advantage of that and truly become a global leader in those things? And if you do think that way, why do you think that way?
Well, let me give an example. Recently, the World Health Organization designated Korea as a so-called WHO global hub for medicines and pharma personnel training, capacity buildings. And first of all, it is very important that this pandemic will be over, pandemic crisis is over, only when all the people around the globe is well prepared. And that means that no one is safe until everybody is safe. So that means improving the access to vaccines is important not only for the high-income countries, but also all low and middle-income countries. So in that sense, this new WHO center will play a pivotal role in improving access to medicines for the globe. And the Korean government is really ready to strengthen this center for several reasons. Korea already has a good infrastructure, especially biopharma industry in Korea is one of the leaders in the globe. So Korea biopharma industry has a good capacity in that area. And also, as you know, Korea has a good, very strong human resources in every part, but health is never an exception. So we have a very high caliber personnel in medicines and biopharma, and we already has a good experience of trainings centers in Osong, in Songdo, in other part of the country. So we had a good infrastructure in terms of training personnel, and government has a very clear and strong commitment to support this center and to make Korea as a leaders, not only in a good healthcare system of Korea, but improving the capacity of healthcare system around the world and improving the preparedness for pandemics in many low and middle income countries. It benefits not only Korea, but really a global effort to combat this pandemic crisis.
Professor Kwon Sun-man, President of Korea Health Industry Development Institute, thank you very much for joining us in studio today.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All three major presidential candidates will vote on Friday morning as the two-day early voting period begins to encourage higher voter participation. Lee Jae-myung of the ruling Democratic Party will vote in Seoul and head to the Upper Gangwon-do province to campaign, where his message will likely be focused on his push to form a united government. Yoon Suk-yeol of the main opposition People Power Party will vote in the southern port city of Busan, having announced a campaign merger with minor opposition People Party's An Chol-soo. Yoon is going to rally support in the conservative strongholds of Daegu City and Gyeongsang-buk-do province. Shin Sang-jung of the Justice Party will vote with her husband, then travel to the southern and central regions of the country. South Korea's foreign exchange reserves ticked up for the first time in 4 months in February. The Bank of Korea on Friday said that FX reserves, a barometer of financial stability, amounted to $461 billion. That's up $240 million from January after 3 straight months on the decline. The central bank attributed the rise to an increase in foreign assets when converted to US dollars. As of the end of January, South Korea was the world's 8th largest holder of FX reserves.
A new study shows that South Korea, among OECD member states, is classified as a winner in terms of its economic performance during the pandemic. In the report published by the German Economic Institute titled 2 Years of Pandemic, Who Are the Winners and Losers? South Korea ranked 3rd among 19 OECD countries. Denmark and Sweden topped the list. The study looked into 7 economic indices, including GDP growth rate, the unemployment rate, and inflation.
Now it's time for Dialogue this week. In this corner, we invite guests from in and out of Korea to talk about a wide variety of issues, ranging from culture and sports to the latest trends around the world. Now, South Korea's film market shrank for a second consecutive year in 2021 due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Revenue from box office sales and online releases and exports of Korean films hit $855 million last year, according to the Korean Film Council, and this represents a 60% decline from the pre-pandemic year of 2019. As the film industry continues to reel from the fallout of the global pandemic, local filmmakers say that they're facing an existential crisis. We discussed how the industry is faring and how filmmakers have had to adapt to the situation. And for this, I'm joined by Piers Conran, film critic and producer in Seoul and editor of the Korean Film Council's website, Kobiz. Very warm welcome to you, Piers. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Seo. Thank you very much for having me.
Right, and well, over the course of the pandemic, we've seen less and less offline events going on, show openings, movie premieres, screening. Would you say that the significance of these have been, well, dying over the stretch of the pandemic?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, of course, the events, the structure of events, whether it's press screenings and VIP screenings and special event screenings for audiences, have always been a huge part of the film culture in Korea. And of course, unavoidably, accounting for COVID, it's been impossible to stage a number of those events. So we've seen the press screenings are still going on, although a lot of press don't go to those screenings anymore. I certainly don't. But VIP screenings have ended completely, unfortunately. So that was always a big event. The screenings that would happen a few days before the movie opens, and there's been just a limited amount of the so-called GV, guest visit, or Q&A events with new releases. With COVID raging, it's just not really possible to do that. There has been kind of it's changed the social environment for filmmakers as well, because of especially the lack of these VIP screenings, where normally it's a good opportunity for filmmakers to kind of get together organically and have those kind of organic connections. And unfortunately, without that, that means a lot of people aren't meeting each other the same way that they normally are.
And it seems that revenue's just been declining drastically over the last 2 years. And while some 500 film industry workers, they jointly released an official statement on Wednesday saying that, it's been such a tough time, and they've called on the government to set up fundamental measures to help them revive the industry. Just how hard have they been hit by the pandemic, and how are they in a way forced to adapt to the situation?
Well, it certainly has been an existential crisis for a lot of people, and it's very unfortunate and strange, where you have kind of two sides to it, where the pandemic is making things extremely difficult for a lot of people in the industry, while at the same time the massive success of Korean content globally, particularly Korean dramas, has been bringing in a massive influx of foreign capital, and some people are of course doing very well. And so the answer for a lot of people is to be able to pivot to dramas. So that's not possible for everyone, but we're seeing more and more filmmakers are moving over to do small screen content. The below the line technicians, such as cinematographers, production designers, all that kind of these key crew members who are normally quite segregated between film and drama, they're also working on dramas now, particularly on streaming dramas for the likes of Netflix, Apple TV, Disney Plus. And so we're seeing this massive exodus. And of course, a lot of the major Korean film companies, the production companies, the studios, the distributors, they're very worried about financing new Korean films. So they've kind of stopped financing films, and they're financing dramas. Companies that worked exclusively on films are now looking at dramas, and so we're seeing just a huge amount of that at the moment.
And well, in response to their financial concerns, the government's promised to spend over $6.7 million to support new films in Korea. Well, not sure how significant this level of support is, but how do you think Korean filmmakers will have to continue to really adapt and respond to the needs of a more global, constantly streaming market?
Well, it's a good question, because now a big change, I think, now for filmmakers, for studios in Korea, is they used to have to consider what is going to work in the Korean market. For films, it's a very strong theatrical market in Korea. It's a really do or die. A film will live or die based on its box office receipts in Korea alone, and companies don't really expect to make money overseas on their films. With dramas, it's completely different. Dramas at this point are expected to generate massive interest overseas, and so when you're pitching content to studios, you have to consider the global audience and think of how these themes and stories will transpose to a global audience. So you kind of have this kind of bifurcated kind of drama industry at this point, where you still have the the very classic K-dramas, the romantic K-dramas that have the very local themes, that have a very loyal global audience that really appreciate that very, very Korean content. But you then also have these kind of larger, more fantastical dramas that we're seeing, particularly on Netflix, that are kind of, things that have very easily digestible social allegories within like high concept genre concepts. So of course I'm talking about things like Squid Game, All of Us Are Dead, Hellbound, all of that. And these are things that are really doing well internationally. And so particularly for filmmakers, people who didn't start as drama makers, they're more angling towards that larger side, that looking for that kind of global audience with these kind of large genre projects that have these kind of social allegories. So they're kind of having to find a way of how to change their filmmaking style that was mostly looking to get a local audience, and now thinking to do that in a larger, longer format for with more general themes that'll really work for a global audience.
And well, in order to bring new ideas and freshness to the screens, it seems essential to nurture young talent. And well, how does South Korea currently support young film directors? And would you say there's something of an ecosystem now?
Oh, absolutely. I think Korea has been very good about supporting younger filmmakers. There's a few different avenues that happens. The biggest thing is the film schools. Korea has a wonderful network of very great film schools, such as the Korean Academy of Film Arts, or the Korean National University of Arts. And over the years, these universities have started to offer these graduate programs where students can come in and make a feature film, and that'll essentially be their debut. And it's kind of like well-funded indie film. And a lot of these filmmakers, are noticed for these films, and they go on to become massive directors. People like Jo Sung-hee, who made Space Sweepers, he debuted with a film called End of Animal, which was one of these film school projects. So you have a lot of that. And I think that the industry as well has always looked to kind of, renew itself constantly. And so they do really look to younger filmmakers. And we're still seeing a lot of that, even people that didn't come in through these film schools. So you'll see two of the most significant films that came out during the pandemic would have been, there was the film The Call, which was made by the debut of a 30-year-old filmmaker called Lee Chung-yeon. And then you have, a few months ago, there was the really good romantic comedy called Nothing Serious, which was the commercial debut of an indie filmmaker called Jung Ga-young, who was also 30 when she made that. So it's great that they're still trusting young filmmakers to kind of, attract these younger audiences into theaters.
And while we want to hear more about female directors in South Korea too, this is something you've brought attention to with your writing. And well, do you think they're becoming more proportionately represented in the industry?
That's a very good question, and something I kind of I wonder about a lot. The answer, in short, is yes. Of course, they are, and there's still a long way to go. But I think there's been, during the pandemic, right up until the beginning of the pandemic, things were really getting quite a bit better. And in 2019, out of about 50 commercial films, 5 of them were made by women, and 4 of those were like in the top 11 films of the year. So it was really very successful. And then during the pandemic, we've seen a number of films by women directors come out. However, I'm of the impression that a lot of those were kind of, smaller films that were kind of used as sort of like sacrificial goats a little bit to kind of test the markets in these, between these different COVID peaks. And so now we're left with a situation where there are a huge amount of films that are finished or in post-production that are awaiting release, and things that have been successively delayed during the pandemic. And out of those, very few of them are by women. So we've only got there are 7 films that are in post-production or awaiting release by women out of, something like 80 or 100 films out there. Out of the 34 films currently in production, only one of them is directed by a woman. So I think there's still quite a long way to go. But things are a lot better than they were a few years ago, for sure.
And well, 2022, how do you forecast this year for South Korean films?
That's a really great question, and I hope things will be better. I think they will be. I think after we kind of get through this Omicron wave, particularly, and when regulations start to change a bit, and when we see people kind of interacting again, and then distributors will hopefully, have the confidence to release some of those really big, heavy hitters that they've been sitting on for a long time, which they're just terrified of releasing into empty theaters. So there's a lot of really great content waiting in the wings. And once Omicron subsides and gives studios an opportunity to release some of that content, I think we'll see a massive swing. It'll take a while to get back to where we were, and who knows if we'll reach 100% of where we were pre-pandemic. But I think there'll be a big change later this year. So I'm expecting maybe by summer we'll see some pretty big hits again.
And also, what are you working on for the rest of the year? We want to hear more about your plans and any projects you might have on.
Oh, well, I'm just doing what I'm usually doing, watching K-dramas, writing about films and the industry, and hopefully doing a bit of more travel this year. There are a few festivals I've been invited to, and after a few years of not being able to travel, it'll be great to be able to kind of rekindle those connections on the international circuit.
Definitely a lot of film festivals coming up, and would you be able to recommend some that are taking place in Korea?
Oh, sure. Well, of course, the three main festivals in Korea are the Jeonju Film Festival, which takes place in spring, and then you have for genre film fans, you have the Bucheon Fantastic Film Festival in summer, and then you have the big one, the so-called Cannes of Asia, the Busan Film Festival, down in October. And so we're hoping that those events will be much more significant this year. Jeonju, which is the first one on deck, is hoping to have a fully physical event this year, which it wasn't able to do the last 2 years. So I'll be very excited to go back myself. I haven't been there since 2019. And then especially Bucheon as well. I think by summer, hopefully things will be much more open by then. And I really hope that international guests will be able to return and kind of to really have one of those old school film festivals that we love to go to.
Definitely, fingers crossed there. And this is where we'll have to wrap up our discussion. Thank you, Piers, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency will visit Tehran on Saturday, raising the prospects of the possible revival of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In a statement released by the IAEA on Thursday, Rafael Grossi will meet with senior Iranian officials to discuss outstanding safeguard issues. The announcement also comes as Israel's stock of uranium enriched up to 60% fissile purity has almost doubled to more than 33 kilograms. That's around 3/4 of the amount needed for a nuclear bomb. At the top of the domestic scene and now hungry to make a splash on the world stage, Kwon Sun-woo has been the face of Korean tennis since a couple of years ago. Ahead of the Davis Cup qualifiers, our Han Sang-yu had the chance to meet with Kwon and files this report.
In the hyper-competitive world of pro tennis, only a handful of Asian men rank within the ATP Tour's top 100, and South Korea's Kwon Sun-woo is one of them. The 24-year-old is representing his country at the upcoming Davis Cup qualifiers against Austria in Seoul, where the men's squad is gunning for their first round of 16 berth in 15 years.
We're getting a lot of support from fans since it's on home soil, so I just want to give them an entertaining performance.
Now entering his prime, Kwon is inching closer to breaking into the world's top 50. And even won his career's first ATP Tour singles title last year, becoming the second Korean to ever do so after Lee Hyung-taek in 2003.
What an honor it was to win an ATP Tour title. Some players in the top 50, even in the top 30 or the top 20, don't have such a title yet.
Everybody didn't expect that he was going to win Astana Open last year in 250 ATP, but he ended up winning the tournament. He had that champion's mind on him.
But to continue his path to the top, Kwon is in urgent need of corporate sponsors so he can train in the most ideal environment. Trying to help him do that is chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea and supporter of Korean tennis, James Kim.
So what I've been doing for Sunu is to really advise him on his tennis career, to help him find the right partnerships, because I really believe that tennis is a global sport. And a fantastic player like Sunu should really have partnerships with global companies, especially that are American, just like I am.
That Mr. Kim is helping my career grow feels like I won the lottery, really. I can't express in words how grateful I am, particularly at a time when it's so hard to secure sponsorships.
AmCham Korea has great confidence in the budding star. So much confidence, in fact, that Kim's willing to bet Kwon has the tools to beat one of the greatest of all time.
Well, if Roger Federer were to come to this tennis court today, I would bet a lot of money on Kwon Sunu to beat Roger Federer. It's not because I disrespect Roger. He's one of the best players in our history. I think Kwon Sunu's game is so well suited to handle anybody.
He hopes that with the strong Davis Cup campaign, the athlete can attract more public interest in Korean tennis and carry that momentum into the 3 remaining Grand Slams later this year. 한성우, Arirang News.
Now, for a look at news from around the world, we have our Isung Jae joining us from the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Well, let's start off in Argentina, where the country agreed to a debt deal with the IMF after tense negotiations.
That's right. So Argentina has sealed a $45 billion debt deal with the IMF on Thursday. This after talks to iron out the final details of the agreement. Now, according to the IMF, the two sides have reached a staff-level agreement on a 30-month extended fund facility. This including a program to tame high inflation, reduce monetary financing of fiscal deficit, and deliver positive real interest rates. The deal will roll over a failed $57 billion credit facility from 2018. Now, despite the agreement being in place, Argentina's Congress and the IMF board still needs it to give it a seal of approval. Now, President Alberto Fernandez told Congress on Wednesday that the country would begin making payments to the IMF in 2026 and complete the repayment by 2034. Now, 500,000 people in and around Sydney have been told to evacuate as record-breaking rain slammed a long stretch of Australia's east coast. Now, dozens of areas are on high alert with major flooding expected along several waterways in the country's most populous city, with Australia's Bureau of Meteorology warning of dangerous flash floods and winds of potentially more than 90 kilometers per hour. Now, the second year of flooding comes as the La Nina weather pattern has dominated Australia's east coast over the summer, with some experts saying increased flooding in the country is most likely driven by climate change. Now, a magnitude 5.7 earthquake hit Veracruz state in southeast Mexico on Thursday, fortunately leading to no injuries or significant damage. Now, local reports say the quake set off seismic alarms as far away as Mexico City. However, a regular morning news conference from Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador was briefly evacuated as the alarm went off. The president resumed the conference shortly after, saying there had not been reports of serious damage. Now, the earthquake was the largest of 2 tremors reported in Mexico on Thursday, as a 4.3 magnitude earthquake also struck off the coast of Michoacan, with no reports of injuries or damage. And finally, residents, motorists, and train passengers in Taiwan on Thursday were affected by a nationwide power outage, which caused disruption, including stopping traffic lights and elevators from working. The island did see power restored gradually after much of the southern region of 5 million households were hit by the outage caused by a malfunction at major power generation plant. Now, normal service also later resumed on the high-speed rail line. President Tsai Ing-wen has ordered an investigation into the malfunction that caused the nationwide outage.
Good morning. It looks to be another day that's way warmer than norms. Morning temperatures are similar to the same time yesterday, but highs will go up even higher, leading to wide gaps in readings today. But those of us in central regions will need a face mask that can block ultrafine dust and an umbrella. About the rain first. Light but loud booms of thunder expected in central regions and Jeollabuk-do province through tonight. But that doesn't mean we'll be free from toxic smog. Western regions will have polluted air all day long again, and parts of the east could be seeing dust levels rising during the morning. Well, low temperatures are again similar to slightly higher than the same time yesterday under mostly sunny skies. Then highs will be 2 to 7 degrees higher this afternoon, feeling more like early April than early March. Then a brief spring cold snap returns for the weekend, along with better air quality. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Oh Seung. Have a great weekend. New day at Arirang. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Monday.
Yes, we're looking forward to the weekend. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for joining us. Have a great couple of days off. Until next time, goodbye.